All right. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I am Demand Gen Manager at Act-On, and I will be your host and moderator for today's presentation. We have a great one for you today. We are going to be talking about mastering the customer journey, how to grow revenue and create customers for life. I think this is something that all marketers are striving to do, so it's going to be a great presentation. We are joined by our friend, Ariane Radmond of IgnitePOST, and we have Andy Porter here from Act-On. They're going to have a great presentation for you guys. But before we get going, just a couple of housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded. We'll be sending out the recording within 24 hours of today's presentation. We also have chat and Q&A enabled. So if at any point you have a question or just want to kind of tell about your experiences, please feel free to share those. We love reading your chats and talking. We have about 15 to 10 minutes set aside at the end of today's presentation for Q&A as well. So don't be shy. Let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to answer those. And then lastly, there is a brief survey at the end of today's webinar. Just a few questions. We love to hear your thoughts on how today's webinar went for you. Helps us create better content for you in the future. So if you have the time, please feel free to do that survey. We totally would appreciate it. And so with that, without further ado, guys, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. Like Kelsey mentioned, definitely use that chat or the Q&A function. Feel free to blow that up as we go along in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Before we start, I want to talk about a little bit about what we're going to do today, what we're going to cover. So we're going to do some intros here in a second, but then we're going to talk all about customer journeys today. So we're going to cover what a customer journey is, why it's important. Talk a little bit about my background, my personal why, and why I'm so passionate about customer journeys in particular. And then we'll dive into the larger current environment and talk a little bit about the relationship-centric era, what that is, what that means, get into a little bit about the secret formulas behind crafting winning customer journeys, and then also talk about science and psychology of how you can use surprise and delight to make winning customer journeys. And throughout all of these, we will stop and we'll go through some case studies and examples. And then, like Kelsey mentioned, we'll do some Q&A, leave some time for Q&A at the end. So with that, let's do some intros first. Andy, I'm going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself first, and then I'll go next.
Absolutely. I'm Andy Porter. I'm the Director of Worldwide Sales Engineering here at Act-On. Been with the company about 12 years at this point. So as we talk about Act-On, for those of you who don't know Act-On very well, we are a marketing automation tool that allows our customers to improve the conversion of leads throughout the funnel, make sure that we're capturing as many people as possible, and then also making sure that we're focusing on that retention and expansion of existing customers, turning people from simple customers to advocates as we move through the life cycle.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm really excited to dive into some of those topics that you brought up as well. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Ariane Radmond. I'm the founder and CEO of IgnitePOST. We're a platform that helps brands create magic moments for their customers using real pen and ink handwritten notes. So our platform is actually part hardware, part software. We use robots that hold real Bic ballpoint pens to write out real handwritten notes. And then our software integrates with platforms like Act-On to allow you to trigger these perfectly timed and crafted moments that really surprise and delight and drive users to action. So I'm really excited to dive in here because a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, a lot of the principles and the frameworks that we're going to go over are things that we've actually, that we work with customers doing all the time. So with that, I'm super excited to dive in and get going here. So first thing, I figured it would be a good thing to start by covering what is a customer journey and why is it important anyway? So a customer journey refers to the path of interactions that an individual has with your brand or product. It's both direct interactions as well as indirect interactions. So direct interactions like contacting a customer service team to indirect interactions like hearing about your brand at an event. So it can be really interpreted as the map of unique interactions that any given customer has with your brand. And the cool thing is no one customer journey is the same. It often differs for every single person that interacts with your brand. So a little bit about kind of my story and my personal why. So IgnitePOST is actually my second business. Before this, I founded a sports coaching marketplace called CoachUp. And in both cases, I learned that the common thread to really building a successful business was to really focus and craft an effective customer journey. And in general, you can really break customer journeys down into three primary sections that we have listed here. So we've got awareness or acquisition, conversion, activation, and then retention and advocacy. So the thing that I have noticed in both businesses is that people make a couple big mistakes. So number one, everybody focuses too much on the awareness and acquisition phase, and nobody puts nearly enough effort into the retention and advocacy. And that's really the key difference that I see between large successful brands and brands who really struggle to break out. If you spend all of your time and attention on the acquisition part and only do the bare minimum for activation, retention, advocacy, then essentially what you're building is a leaky bucket. Yet this is what most brands do, and this is what we see all the time. And at IgnitePOST, we spend a lot of time working with brands to kind of plug those holes and stop that leaky bucket. So, to create customers for life, really the important metrics to understand are your cost of acquisition, your retention rates, and your lifetime value. And it's really your customer journey that influences those things.
Yeah, and Arian, before you move on, one thing that I can echo here is when I get into a lot of conversations with customers that are moving into marketing automation, the heavy focus is how do I get more leads into the top of the funnel? And there's too often that heavy focus there, and then I'm not worried about our customer retention. I'm not really focused on that, and so you lose this captive audience that already has chosen you, and you're not capitalizing on that effect. And so I think that's something that we see across the market, whether you're talking about IgnitePOST, Act-On, or any other tool that you're looking at.
Totally, 100%. And I always like to put this slide up here because the customer journey, there's so many things and components that go into it. A lot of times we get questions as to what falls into different categories and what falls into different sections. And so if we talk about the effectiveness of a customer journey, that will either make or break your brand, either make you wildly successful or actively sabotage you. These are the various touch points and the various phases of the journey that we talk about. So what I'm going to do is I won't go into kind of all of these things, but I just want to give people an idea of what various touch points along different phases look like. So what we want to do now is I'm going to give you a framework that I'm going to share here in a moment that actually allows you to craft and influence a customer journey that leads users to make purchases with you. And so to create a robust and scalable, effective customer journey, like there's a bunch of things here, but really there's three things that you really need to focus on, and everything else kind of stems from those things. And those three things are these right here. So number one, you need a deep understanding of your target customer. This typically involves breaking up your core customers into target personas and really digging in deep and understanding who is it that I'm actually targeting and going after, right? If you don't have a good understanding of who you're targeting, then it's going to be very difficult to actually craft a journey that's enjoyable or delightful or even effective for them. Second, after you've figured out who your target is, then you need to create a strategy. You need a well thought out strategy. Every interaction and touch point with your brand should be intentional and have a purpose. And this is important because there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, as well as a way to use science and psychology to your advantage, which we're going to talk about here in some of these later slides. But this is really the only way to create customers for life, is to actually understand your customer and then actually have a strategy based on who your customer is to surprise and delight them. And then, of course, the third piece is having a scalable way to execute, measure, and improve as you go. So that's kind of the three pieces put together is really the framework that you need to think about when you're crafting a customer journey.
And I think what's important here is to understand that this is almost a cycle as you're dealing with this, because it's not, once you get to that last piece of creating the content and getting the feedback, then you get a better understanding of your customer, and then you start to strategize. And so being able to adapt and apply the learnings that you have throughout the life cycle is going to be crucial within this framework.
Totally, yeah. And said another way, it's kind of this intersection here in the middle is really where the winning customer journey comes from. Uh, and honestly, each of these components here could probably be a webinar in and of itself. We can dive into scalability and automation and all that. We can talk about targeting your personas and how you develop those personas. For the purpose of this webinar, I'm actually going to really focus in on the strategy part, because my goal is to really arm you with tools and frameworks and strategies that you can take and implement yourself in your business right now, or for your brand. If you're interested in either of those other things, reach out to Andy or myself afterwards. We can go all day and talk more into scalability and developing your personas, but we're really going to zero in and start talking about some strategies that you can take and implement yourself. So before we do that, let's understand the current framework, the current environment, the playing field, before we talk about the framework that's going to help us. So right now, we're living in what we like to call the relationship-centric era. But I like to reverse back a little bit to figure out how we got here. So back in the 2000s, everything was what I would call product-centric, right? People care about how many features we cram into a product. When a new service or product came out, you heard people talk about things like, oh, we have 10 million lines of code in this product. It was really about cramming a lot of bells and whistles into a specific product. And then what people realize is that people don't really care about all of these bells and whistles that you cram into your product. They really care about how your product or service can really help them. So then we transitioned into, I'd say in the 2010s, into what I like to call the customer-centric era. And this is, we're all familiar with the marketing adage, oh, people need to see my brand 7 times before they realize it. I think actually now it's probably more like 12 times, because there's just been so much noise created. And now we're in this spot where customers are just oversaturated with way too many digital touch points everywhere. And so the key really is, if we're transitioning to today, to think about, all right, how can I cut through some of this noise, and how can I really develop a relationship with my customers? That's what people want, right? So we call that this time in which we're living, the relationship-centric era. And it's less about how many times can I get in front of people. It's more about quality over quantity, and it's more about developing that relationship with your customers at scale. We're at a point where everybody wants the white glove treatment. Everybody wants to be treated like a VIP, or to feel like they're a VIP. So to win, it's about creating that experience and developing that relationship and giving everybody that VIP feel. And by the way, don't take my word for this. This is actually backed by data. So we're at a point right now where every email user on the planet gets an average of about 120 emails into their inbox every day, coupled with 5,000 digital ads that get pushed their way on every device that we own: your tablet, your watch, your smartphone, everywhere. So everything is vying for people's attention. And it's no wonder that the cost of customer acquisition has risen by 60% over the past 5 years. That's according to Business Flyer. And so today, brands really need to differentiate themselves if they're going to win. So they need to differentiate themselves from their competitors. And you don't do this by making different products from your competitors. You do this by giving your users a differentiated and better experience than your competitors. So that's what we're going to dive into and talk through right now.
And before you move on, Arian, a couple of things on that screen, that previous screen. 120 emails per day. A good example of this just influx is thinking that, hey, we're building this relationship. I can provide value to something. So a good example for those of us who live in the U.S. who've done daylight savings recently. In my inbox, I had random emails from pizza places, oil change, about daylight savings. I don't know how that impacts whether or not I'm going to buy a pizza or not, but it's just that kind of misguided, personalized relationship where the feeling is, hey, if I have an excuse to email you, I should email you, or I should send you communications, because that will keep us top of mind. But as you see on this right-hand side of this slide, spam filters are smarter. They're learning that volume doesn't mean that people want to receive the messages. And so as you're seeing ISPs, Yahoo and Google just went through another layer of filtering to make sure that people are getting the messages that they want from the people that they want to receive messages from. It's all about that engagement rate. It's all about making sure that when you do get into the inbox, that somebody is likely to engage with it. And for me, a pizza place sending, hey, take advantage of losing an hour by buying our pizza, that's not going to be the reason that I'm going to click through an email. And if they're sending me that sort of stuff every day or every other day, likely I'm just going to start ignoring it. It becomes white noise even from that single vendor. So making sure that you have that understanding of your users and building that will help you with this spam filter and that engagement. So as we move forward, Arian will absolutely expand upon that idea.
Totally. So you didn't buy the pizza then?
I did not buy the pizza. I went with wings that day. So I mean, still worth it.
I love it. I love it. Nice. No, but that's actually a really good segue into what we're going to talk about now, which is that secret formula, right? So the whole idea is you want to create customers for life, and to do so, we have to understand that landscape, and we've got to overcome two primary challenges. So number one, we've got to cut through the digital noise that Andy just spoke about, and number two, when we actually do reach our customers, it has to be quality. You've got to create meaningful, memorable connections with customers. Both are necessary to establish long-term business. Remember, relationship centric. So how do you do this effectively? The answer is you use human psychology and science. We're humans at the end of the day. So let's use some of that to our advantage. Let's use some psychology to our advantage. What we like to use at IgnitePOST is this framework that we call the surprise and delight trifecta. And there's three parts to it, right? There's overcoming the digital saturation that we just spoke about, creating intentional touch points that actually build relationships with customers, and then using science and psychology to maximize those efforts. So kind of all three work together to craft this kind of winning trifecta. And so why is this important? Well, it's important because if you do this and you follow these components, it will increase customer satisfaction and spending, it'll boost loyalty, and it will lead to more sales and allow you to charge higher prices. At IgnitePOST, we call this the power of personal in our customer journey. And basically, to delight people in your customer journey, the whole idea is to make customers feel that there's an actual human, a person on the other side of the transaction. And when you do that, you'll do those things. You'll increase customer satisfaction, you'll boost loyalty, and it will lead to more sales and you being able to charge higher prices. And by the way, this is not just something I'm making up. This is actually backed by scientific research. I left the link down here in the bottom right corner. But it works because of these couple of principles here. And this is now starting to get into that science and psychology of who we are as human beings. So customers see companies as these abstract entities that are formed by workers that might as well be objects, right? Buyers typically don't know who the creator of their product is, and this trend is accelerating everywhere, right? If you think about this, a blender can be bought on Amazon without anyone ever interacting with anyone at all. You can go and order a burger at McDonald's on a touchscreen. So if you contrast this to what happened in the past, an artisan of the past who built a product, let's say you wanted to go and buy a chair, like a piece of furniture, you would actually go to the furniture maker, you would talk to them, interact with them, they would build it for you and then give it to you. And then that would create that kind of personal experience because you were buying something directly from the person who was selling it from you, from the creator. And that felt good for both the buyer and the seller, which is why, people love that. That's also why people love buying and selling handmade products on Etsy, because you can actually interact with the creator. So it's the reason why that exists is because who we are as humans, we're social creatures. And if you can connect with if you can connect your customers with the people behind creating an actual product, it creates a strong bond. And so the whole idea is to do that within your customer journey and inject these intentional touch points that do just that. And so I'm actually going to walk you through an example of how you can do that with a customer that we did this with. So here's an example of this power of personal in actual real life. So this is Jack. He's the founder and CEO of True. It's an energy drink that competes with 5-Hour Energy. It's kind of a healthy alternative to 5-Hour Energy. And his goal is he wanted to compete with those big brands, didn't have as big of a budget, but he wanted to differentiate himself in the market so that customers chose his brand over some of the more established players. And he knew that if he wasn't able to keep customers around, then his brand wasn't going to last long. So he chose an intentional touch point, which is that had immense value, which is after somebody made their first purchase of a sample or variety pack with him. So again, one, the solution, thinking about your customer journey and what points have value to you. So that's what he did. And then his goal was, let's target this area and inject some surprise and delight by connecting folks to the people behind the company at that point. So it's challenging, I know, to do in a way that overcomes the three major hurdles of cutting through noise, deepening relationships, and using psychology. But it is possible to do, and so this is what he did, and this is the approach they took. So at that point, after somebody purchased that variety pack, he had some surprise and delight by sending one of our handwritten notes to the actual person. And this is the example of the note. This is the actual note that he sent. But he did those three things. He cut through the noise, so he didn't just send another email. He built a deeper relationship with his customer, and he humanized the brand. If you read his message, the message is about, hey, I'm reaching out. I just want to thank you for giving True a shot. We're a startup. We're a young team of entrepreneurs. Would you be willing to write us a review? So just kind of a simple ask. And now the interesting part is what happened after he did this and put this into effect. So number one, he definitely got an influx of new reviews, new positive reviews. But more importantly, things like this happened where he was able to successfully mitigate negative customer experiences and actually turn them into success stories. This is an actual real email that he got. And actually what happened is they shipped somebody the wrong product. So this is someone that probably should be upset or at least not happy that they ordered something and they got something completely different. But instead, because he had that intentional touch point, because he humanized the brand, Catherine reached out and said, hey, by the way, I got your thank you card. Thanks so much. Little things that make the difference. I'll post this on social media. I wrote a review for you on Amazon. By the way, can you send me what I actually ordered and charge my card? So again, it's using those little intentional touch points in human psychology to turn things around that will just kind of take your business to the next level and inject that human surprise and delight factor. So.
And I think what's interesting on this one is there's still that element of that Amazon experience that's going on. We're not saying that what you have to do is create this, I'm going to go talk to everyone that I'm working with. You still need to meet people where they are. And most people do want that touch-free experience. Think of it as the car wash. They want the wash, they want the cleaning, but they don't want to be touched too much in that. And so when you get something like this where you change the focus, give them something different and something like to the point Arian's been making about surprise and delight, changing the way that you're communicating, maybe hitting them with an SMS in a different way with a personalized communication outside of just doing the email, the direct mail piece where it's a handwritten card, where it feels like something different, making sure that you're varying how you're communicating with your customers and hitting them with the different levels of communication based on what they're focusing on. That's really key in that surprise element because they're not sitting there seeing it's just another email in the inbox, or I'm getting just another phone call. I don't want to talk to somebody right now. You're giving them different layers of communication that allow you to vary the experience and create that personalized experience through channels at scale.
Totally, yeah. And remember, like key points, key takeaways, right? Two things. One, use surprise and delight to show the human side of your business. And then two, of course, you want to choose touch points that have valuable outcomes for you. So that goes into the strategy that we were talking about before. So anyway, so that's a little bit about kind of this section in terms of human psychology and science here. If this makes sense, if it was helpful, blow up the chat, write yes in the chat. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in there. Otherwise, I'm going to go on and actually talk about another piece of human psychology that we actually use to help in our customer journey. And we're actually going to go through how you can use this in your journey to craft winning customer journeys. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is what's called peak end rule or peak end theory. So basically, the whole idea here is we evaluate, as humans, we evaluate experiences based on how we remember them. And as humans, our memories don't store everything. It's not possible to store everything about an experience. So when we recall an experience, our mind actually reconstructs the experience based on a few cues that it has stored, which, by the way, can be easily influenced if you're intentional about it. So science has shown that people remember an experience by its peak moment and by its ending. One thing I always like to do is this is the billboard for the latest Boston Calling. I'm a Boston guy, but it's really interesting because peak end theory is at work here. If you look at the lineup every day, there's a reason why every day the headliner or the biggest act of the day ends each day. It's because as humans, that's what we remember. We remember like one most intensely, positive moment, and then remember the ending of a particular event. And so if you look here, this is literally peak end theory in action. So every day ending with something that's very, very memorable. So the whole idea is, why is that relevant and how can I use this? So the whole idea is to use this rule to your advantage. So that means if we can find one moment on the customer journey that is significant and valuable to your brand, it's worth the effort of crafting a highly delightful and positive experience around that moment, because that's what customers will remember. And to dive in here, I'm actually going to show you an example of what we did using this peak end theory. So we worked with Carson, who's the director of CX at Legion Supplements. They're a natural sports supplement brand. They offer subscriptions. And he basically wanted to find a way to keep people in their existing subscriptions longer. So basically extend their subscriptions. So he did some research and he found out that people on average were in their subscription for about 8 months before they ended up churning. So what does that sound like? That sounds like the end of a journey or the end of an experience. And so we said, okay, this is a super valuable point. What can we do to really create an intensely positive moment here so that it's not the end of the journey? So this is what we set up. So we knew that customers normally turned around month 8, especially if they're no longer engaging with the brand. So on month 7, we actually created this experience and automated it for Carson. And so members got this actual handwritten card in the mail. They said, hey, did you know you're one of our best customers? You're a big deal around here. Without supportive people like you, we wouldn't exist. As a thank you, here's 15% off your next 3 months of subscriptions with this coupon code. And he sent like a personal offer, a personal code. So again, we took a specific point in time that could be viewed as the end of a journey and just created an intensely positive moment right there. Literally called them a VIP, treated them like a VIP, rolled out the white glove service for them. And as a result, he had a 7% conversion rate from that cohort. Basically preempted customers from churning out of their subscription, which means an increase in their customer lifetime value. Like just think about your own brand, right? How valuable would it be if 7% of people who were going to cancel decided not to? By the way, if you do this on a monthly basis, like let's say you have a 7% monthly churn rate, the equivalent annual churn rate is 58.14%. So if you have a 7% monthly churn rate, you're losing more than half of your customers every year. So just think about this. This actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier with how important retention is. So if you could snap your fingers right now and grow your user base by 58%, that's certainly something worth doing.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where automation really fits into the journey very well, because a lot of the issues that you have with something like a peak end experience is you have to have that set up, that pre-configured follow-up, expecting somebody to remember, okay, I need to go in and engage at these different layers, at these different statuses. That's expecting a lot of human capital to go do this.
Totally.
And so having that layer of automation of understanding, okay, here is what we consider the peak experience. A good example is we work with a number of different hospitality, Red Lion hotels, one of our case studies. They use Act-On to help to promote the stay experience before somebody shows up, giving them a layouts of the property that somebody's going to stay at, what other amenities that they could be using or leveraging during their stay. What sort of things, as far as a dining experience in the area, that might be of interest to the individuals. And so they're building up that peak experience when somebody actually gets to that stay, but they don't leave it there. They go and have a post-stay sort of engagement where after somebody stays, they try to understand, how was your stay? What sort of things worked? What sort of engagement were you getting in that experience? And so you're also then trying to build from, hey, we appreciate your responses. Here's some other things or other locations that might be of interest to you. So you're building that future likelihood of somebody in that end experience of that particular engagement to come back and have another experience with you. And so in those sort of transactional sort of engagements that people have, that purchase of a subscription, whether we're talking about that or a single product, having that peak, that purchase is that peak layer, and then that end is, you want to have that end as far out as possible when it's a subscription. So making sure that you are building up that experience post peak to create a positive experience to where you don't have a likelihood of that end process, if it's that person's choice, being something that they will choose and look back on negatively on the company.
Totally, yeah. And the interesting thing too is once you kind of understand and know this theory, you kind of start seeing it around you everywhere. So at least that's what happened to me when I kind of first ran across peak end theory. I was like, oh man, now I see this happening all around me everywhere. So I thought that's interesting. That was a little tidbit that I took away. But in terms of the key ideas and takeaways here, right? Use peak end rule to concentrate your surprise and delight touch points, and find one point along your customer journey and make it intensely pleasurable. So those are kind of the two big takeaways here. So
we have we have a good
ahead.
question here from the chat, and we've got a couple of questions. One we're going to address at the end because I think it deserves a deeper conversation. But Heather asks, if you know your customer lifetime value or lifetime is about 13 months, would you send a win-back campaign at the 13-month, and how many attempts would you recommend for trying to regain that customer? So go ahead, Arian.
You go first. I'll chime in later.
I'll go. So I would say starting earlier is always the better experience in that. So if you know that let's say your lifetime is about 13 months, making sure that you are engaging them prior to that anticipated end is going to likely push out that anticipated end. And if you do have that end experience and it's more about that win back, I would give a little bit of a breather, especially in a subscription-based sort of thing, a product-based, where you know that, hey, somebody is going to likely have an annual subscription. I would give a breather, and maybe 6 months after the contract, that's when I should start that win back sort of conversation. Hey, how are things going? Hey, we know we talked about these sort of rules and layers when you were a customer with us, and are you achieving those sort of things moving forward? So that would be my recommendation, especially in a SaaS subscription-based sort of engagement. You always want to start early in both senses because if you get too close to that decision point, it's already too late.
Yeah, totally. And I would echo a lot of those sentiments too. That was kind of where my mind went first is, anytime you can keep a customer before they churn, you want to do that because it's always easier to keep a customer and sell more to them than it is to win them back after they've left. So, to echo Andy's point, yes, always start earlier. And then this is actually an awesome question because we're going to dive into a little bit of that next. Actually, we're going to go through how, if you are doing a win back experience, some different techniques and different things that you can do to win people back onto the customer journey. So we'll actually dive into that here in a moment. Cool. All right. So with that, let me dive in here. So the next thing that we're actually going to talk about, and that was actually a very good segue, is the delightful feedback loop. So this is a framework that we use at IgnitePOST a lot. And the key to customers really feeling a sense of surprise and delight is to seeming as though you're in their minds, you're in your customers' minds, and know exactly what they're thinking when they're thinking it. So we use this technique called a delightful feedback loop to do just that. And so to elaborate, we basically delight customers, ask for feedback, take that feedback, and then use it, put it into action to inject some surprise and delight into the customer journey at the appropriate time. So I'm actually going to walk through an example. It was really cool that we got that question from the audience here of exactly how to do this. So this is actually best done in a two-step, two-phase approach. So phase one is data mining. Find a way to survey users, gather data about a particular moment that you want to inject some surprise and delight, which can be done in a number of different ways: surveys, calling, email. You can actually just go into your database and just do some data mining there. And then once you have that information, data mine it, figure it out, and I'll go into this in the next slide here. But basically, take that feedback and use it to surprise and delight customers in a way that feels like you're reading their minds. Like your whole goal is for customers to say, "How in the world do they know I was thinking about this right now, right at this exact moment?" Now, to actually illustrate this, the best thing to do is actually walk you through an example. So here's an example of how you can do exactly this. So we work with a company called Point Broadband. They're a broadband provider. They provide fiber broadband to rural and suburban America. They basically use this delightful feedback loop technique, and they had some amazing results. So here's what they did. Phase one, data mining. They reached out to customers who had canceled their accounts to ask them to fill out a feedback form. Really just, hey, I know you left us. What's going on? If you're unhappy with the service, tell us. Just give us some feedback. They used our service, so we did this via a handwritten note. And this is exactly what the note said. Hey, if you're happy, I'd like to know why. Is the quality better with whatever service you move to? Is it less expensive? Give us a call back and let us know. I will say, caveat here is you don't have to do this with a handwritten card. That was our service, so we did. This also works really well if you do things like send out surveys via text message or email or anything like that. But the whole idea is to actually get the information, right? You pick that moment and you need to get the information from your customers. So how you do that is less important than just the fact that you do it. So that's kind of a little caveat there. But the interesting part here with Point Broadband is after they received the information back, so after they surveyed their users, they went into phase two, which is feedback analysis. And this is just a screenshot from the internal report that they put together. But when they boiled everything down and they got hundreds and hundreds of responses, it turns out that everything could be boiled down to the reasons for cancellation were just one of like a handful of reasons. And actually some of these kind of overlap. Like they differentiated price and rate increase to two different things. To me, they're kind of the same. So there's really only a handful of reasons why literally all of their customers were canceling or switching their service. So then what we did in phase two is we said, aha, now we know what people are thinking. Let's preemptively just assume that everybody is thinking those things because we have a pretty good idea if they canceled, it was for one of these handful of reasons. So we took that information and we triggered a follow-up handwritten note after somebody had canceled their account, and we preemptively spoke to why they canceled. And so this is the note they sent. If you notice, the first line says, hey, since you left, we've been working to improve reliability, speed, customer service, and more. Those were all the main points that people spoke about when they were surveyed and asked why they canceled. So we preempted them. And the results were awesome. They had a 4% win back rate. And since this is automated, this runs every single month and automatically recovers 4% of lost customers without them lifting a finger. By the way, we also tested out the cadence of when to send these notes out. So we tested 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, and 6 months was kind of like the sweet spot. Any earlier than that, it was a little bit too early and people didn't really switch back. Any later than that, people felt kind of they were too far down and entrenched with the service. But keep in mind, this is a cable company, right? This is not just like click a couple buttons and I'm going to switch service. This is actually a very painful process of switching back. So the fact that they were able to get 4% of people that canceled to come back and return old equipment, get new equipment, schedule an installation is a big feat. So this was something that was like really huge for them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Aryan is mentioning with this is there's a lot of data that underlies how you're building this up. And some of it is provided by your customers explicitly. So asking for those surveys, using some automation to get touch points and NPS type activities is important even prior to somebody leaving. So having a finger on the pulse of your customers throughout their life cycle is really important. And especially if you do know that people are leaving, hey, what are the reasons for that? That could be something that you're asking a survey for. That could be something that's stored in your CRM because you're when people cancel, you're tracking that information. So it doesn't have to be a painful process to gather that information. A lot of it is already stored. It's already information that you have. It's a matter of then using that information and, for lack of a better term, weaponizing it to make sure that you're effective in the market. Having the data is one thing, but being able to leverage both the explicit data that you have in CRM and what customers have responded, and the implicit behavioral data, the things that automation is designed to track, how they're engaging with your website, how they engaged 6 months ago versus how they're engaging now. That could give you a big indication of whether or not somebody is likely to even hit that cancellation. So when you get to these handwritten letters, these SMS messages where you're trying to get somebody back on track, you can be preemptive and talk about 6 months before their contract is due up to have that sort of feedback loop. And then 6 months after, if somebody does cancel, having that touch point of saying, hey, you left. How are things actually going? Is the grass actually greener on the other side? And a lot of times you'll find that's about the perfect time where the pain of the excitement of switching to something else is over, and the pain of what they're missing from what they had previously starts to bubble up, and it gets past. It's before that complacency status that Ariane was mentioning earlier.
Totally, yeah. And that actually dovetails really nicely to kind of the next point that I wanted to make, which is one of my favorite quotes. This is by Patrick Campbell, CEO of ProfitWell. They're a SaaS platform that does pricing and kind of churn data. But by really focusing on this retention piece, by increasing your retention rate by just 5%, he said it's possible to increase your profits by up to 95%, which is like crazy to me. So that to me is something to really kind of hone in on. So if we're
and
talking
that number is
about,
actually also validated by Harvard Business Review as well. So that is a pretty industry standard. If you get that retention up 5%, like Point Broadband did, you can get up to that 90%, 95% profit. So it could have that huge impact.
Totally. So, summary, delightful feedback loop summary. Best surprise and delight experiences give customers the feeling that you're really, as a brand, understanding them. 2, you want to make customers think that you're in their minds and truly understand who they are, what they're going through. And then, of course, breaking that down to that 2-phase approach typically works the best, where you do some data mining first and then put it into action second. So quick recap of just in general what we talked about today. So we talked about differentiating from the competition. We took a look at the current state of the world and talked about the 3 things you have to do to create a sense of surprise and delight that creates customers for life. So a way to cut through the digital noise, intentional touch points that deepen relationships, and then, of course, leveraging some of these science and psychology tricks that we've talked about to get the desired effects. We also talked about strategy, dove into some specific examples of showing how you can analyze your customer journey for areas that are valuable to you and your brand and create touch points, intentional touch points there. And then, of course, beginning of the webinar, we spoke about the 3 things that you need to have to surprise and delight in your customer journey, which is understanding your personas, having a strategy, and then, of course, having a scalable way to test and measure repeatedly. So we talked in depth about number 2, strategy, in this webinar, but the other 2 areas are critically important as well. Like I said before, happy to follow up if anybody's interested in talking through those. But hopefully this gave you a little bit more of specific strategies that you can kind of take and put into action yourself. So with that, who's ready to take and put some of these strategies into action? And I'll leave this here. If there's any questions, or if anybody needs or is curious or has any questions about anything we went through, happy to dive in and talk through those right now. I will also say, as an offer, if anybody's interested in using IgnitePOST or kind of kicking the tires and trying the service out, we actually are giving away $1,000 in free handwritten cards. I'll have Kelsey reach out and send out this link, but it's super easy. Pick sign up for any of our plans. We'll add $1,000 in credits, and you can use IgnitePOST through Act-On. We have a nice integration there, so you get a nice intentional touch point, and you can automate things so that you can scale as well. So hopefully everybody takes advantage of that. It's available to folks that are on this webinar, so there's no reason not to. Definitely fill out that form, and one of our team members will follow up with you later.
Great. Great. Thank you both. So many great topics and strategies discussed today. We did have a couple of questions if you want to dive into those.
Yeah.
First, we had a question about any tips for creating a personal touch to humanize the brand in terms of B2B, where many individuals are involved in a decision-making process, and throughout the project, who do you reach out to?
So, I mean, again, even if there's multiple decision makers in the process, everybody individually is still a human. So I think a lot of these principles still apply. I think even more so, right? So especially if there's multiple people that are kind of weighing in on decisions. I mean, again, if we're talking about kind of like a B2B sales process or B2B sales aspect, it's really about finding kind of like a champion. So you can still create those personal human touch points. You can do a lot of the things that we talked about here. But really, I'd say my suggested way of going about that is to pick someone that you think is going to be your champion and really kind of humanize and reach out with some of those intentional touch points first, and kind of like own one hill before you move on to some others. So that's been a technique that has worked well for me. But in terms of the techniques, I don't think I would change anything. It would just be kind of directing with more intentionality, I guess.
Yeah, I think kind of jumping in on that, there's a separation, I would say, between what you're doing from a marketing perspective and what you're doing from a sales perspective. So when we're talking about the sales organization, like they've got to have a finger on the pulse of what's happening. And from a marketing perspective, you can absolutely support them with the tools and templates to be able to trigger some of these different communication paths based on what they're understanding, what they're getting from the organization that they're working with. But I think from a marketing perspective, making sure that you are actually engaging with as many people at the organization as possible to build up that actual, when kind of going back to that data mining element, that experience or that enough data as far as how somebody is engaging with you to understand a few different things about the person. A, who they are. B, how they want to be engaged with, and C, what is the best likelihood of actually getting that surprise and delight in. So you may have somebody who's getting a lot of emails from you but not engaging with any of them, but they're actually going to the website a lot and they're engaging on the website. What can we do to actually personalize that experience or have that pattern interrupt as used often in sales conversations, making sure that maybe that's a person that email's not actually working with, so let's change the channel. Let's hit them with a handwritten note from the organization of saying, hey, we really appreciate you considering our organization, and then have that sent on behalf of the sales rep. So that person now has that reputation not only built up with your brand, but with the person that is going to be their facilitator for making a positive decision in what situation what organization or vendor they're going to go with from a B2B perspective. So I would say making sure that you capture that information enough to be able to have that surprise element available for you. It may be an SMS. It may be, hey, we need to do some retargeting for this individual so they don't forget about us when they're doing the website. It's not putting everything out there all at once. It's a matter of making sure that we're addressing people in the channels that might be most effective for them, and not becoming that white noise.
Yeah, totally. And just to like piggyback on that, as a demand gen manager too, I will say that just creating that surround sound, creating that that different channels, messaging across different channels, but the same message, and kind of just really seeing what's working and what's not is so important to learn how you can best motivate people into the journey you want them to have.
And I think that helps you to anticipate what other similar customers will be like. So you can start to programatize some of the things. Somebody is engaging in this way, so we've seen some success. Let's do this, and then go back and look back at the results, and then start over, understand the customer again, get to that personalized experience, and then look at your results, and then get back to that understanding. So it's an iterative process always. Unfortunately, Kelsey's job will never end here at Act-On.
It's true. It's true. It never ends. There's never a shortage of work. We did have another question. So we talked about a lot of different strategies here. Lewis wants to know, how should I evaluate our current journey in order to choose what's the best approach, or should I do all the approaches?
Yeah, so I mean, best is subjective. I mean, what my typical framework is kind of look at your customer journey, figure out where you think the biggest kind of problem or friction point is, and start there. I mean, that's just kind of a general framework for almost anything. It's like, what is the biggest problem you can identify, fix that. What's the second biggest problem you can identify, fix that. So, it's not about doing absolutely everything. I'd say it's being more intentional and kind of really going in to see where you can have the most effect. So, we talked about the customer journey in terms of, acquisition, activation, retention, referral. So look at all of the interactions from, somebody hearing about your brand to becoming a customer, kind of map out the whole thing, and then see where you think the biggest friction points are. And that's how I would figure out where to start. You definitely don't have to do everything all at once. In fact, it makes it very difficult to measure and kind of figure out what is impacting, what's actually having an impact if you do too much. So I would say more intentionality, figure out where the biggest friction point is, or where the biggest opportunity for improvement is. Start there, and then once you've identified that area, then go and see what techniques, how can I use like some science and psychology, how can I inject some surprise and delight, how can I use some of the tools that we talked about and some of the frameworks that we talked about here at that point, and then of course measure and see what the effects are. So I would kind of go about that intentionally, not all at once.
And I would say, kind of going back to one of the things we said early on in the presentation, you'll likely find very low-hanging fruit and easy opportunities as you look at that retention aspect of things, or lower down in the funnel. The hardest thing that you're going to do is just trying to find ways to have more feed into the top of the funnel. Look at different ways that you can convert from different stages. How do we increase the conversion rate, widen out that set of that funnel, or how do we support our sales organization to be able to close their deals faster? So speeding up the life cycle. I think those would likely be areas, if you look kind of down funnel or post sale, where you'll find some really good opportunities that might be low hanging fruit that isn't really changing a whole lot of the things that you're doing from an acquisition perspective. You're just using that same strategy, those same tools to feed into, how do I make my customers happy? How do I help my sales team stay on top of the deals that they have in the pipeline? So you'll find that you'll have some low-hanging fruit there to make sure that there are opportunities to change. But as Arian said, don't try to eat too much in one bite. Try to do things intentionally and plan out, how am I going to be able to measure these results and see what my impact is, and prove my impact up to the executive team as I work through some of these stages.
Absolutely. And then just one other question. Do you have any tips for mapping out the customer journey, especially if you have different personas and different industries that you're targeting? How would you go about doing that?
Andy, you want to take this one, or do you want me to hop in?
I can jump in first, and then I'll let you be the color commentary on this one. I would say the first thing is to understand your customers. So before you can really understand your personas, understand who's actually bought from you in the first place, and that will help you build out the ideal customer profile. Who are our most successful customers? And that's going to help you to then extrapolate that into different audiences. Understand, why are people choosing us? And so when people, you kind of break down at the core, who is the customer that is actually choosing us, and then extrapolating that information, you can start to understand what are the things that motivate this individual. What are the different touch points? How do I anticipate things? And then also look at the data that you have in CRM. How long is the sales cycle? How long is my typical customer sticking around? Because that will help you to understand what sort of sales cycle, what sort of engagement rate that you have with individuals. And so you can start to plan those different sequences. Understand that maybe 6 months is the right time frame for you, and so you should plan everything on a 6-month sales cycle. Or maybe you have a 3-year sales cycle, so you have to do that long tail sort of communication path. And so understanding who your customers are, using the data at your disposal to understand how they're engaging, that's going to help you to get that baseline framework, and then iterate on that. Don't take that as the only thing that you learned, because 3 years ago your customer base is not going to be the same as your customer base 3 years from now, or even 6 months from now.
Totally, yeah. And then just to piggyback on that too, for sure, a lot of times just pen and paper has been my best friend. So that's where I typically like to start. Echoing kind of what Andy said, starting with your ideal customer profile is super important. Just kind of figuring out who it is that we want to target and getting as granular as you possibly can and really humanizing them. So I see a lot of folks a lot of brands actually don't go far enough when they create those ICPs, in actually like giving them a name and giving them a backstory and kind of really, really humanizing them. So that's one, suggestion or tip that I would have there. But I would also say, if you asked about kind of like the process, don't let process get in the way of actually just executing and getting it done. Many, many times I've literally just started with like pen and paper and just started, scribbling things down. And then once you take that, you can get a little bit more structured. Same thing for the customer journey. Pen and paper has been my best friend too there. Literally just taking a look at, all right, what are all the touch points that customers could possibly have with our website, our app, our integrations, like where are people coming in, just to kind of get an overall idea. I've used tools like flow map and things like that as well to kind of map things out. But again, I think the actual tools you use are less important than the actual process of just going through and thinking through it. Because once you have everything in front of you, that's when you actually start making connections and can actually start seeing some of these things and actually putting some of the stuff that we talked about here in this webinar into action.
And I would say just try things. The worst thing that you can do is let perfect be the enemy of good. As you're building these things out, you're not going to be perfect. And that's the whole point. And even if you do become perfect now is not going to be perfect 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, a year from now. You should always be constantly revising, going back and saying, is my customer base really like this anymore? Using maybe not an erasable pen or a pencil instead of the pen sometimes, or being okay scribbling things out. It should be an iterative process, and it should be an ongoing process that as you learn more, as you get more information, as you get more data, as you find out this is the data that I want to track, and then use that data to inform your decision on how you move forward. It should always be a growing iterative process, a cycle to get back to, okay, where should we be going now?
Absolutely. I love that. And then I actually just heard on LinkedIn someone say that like perfection is the new procrastination. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Okay, great presentation, you guys. I thought that was so helpful. We have some really great feedback already in the chat. Thank you all for joining us today. If you guys have any other questions or would like to get in touch with us, please feel free to do so. I will be following up with the recording as well as the slides if anybody is interested. And then again, there is a survey after this presentation, so please fill that out if you have time. And with that, have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you later.